Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we drill down into your source material to pull out the most practical knowledge and insights we can find. Today, we're tackling something that is, well, it's the foundational structure of any successful organization. Company core values.
It really is. And it's one of those topics that, everyone nods along to in the big meeting, but
Yeah.
very few truly get it right. We've all seen the result, right? These
Yeah.
beautiful posters on the wall listing integrity, excellence.
Right.
But then you watch what actually happens day to day, and those values are, well, they're just theoretical. They're not behavioral. They just live in a handbook somewhere.
And that is the absolute core of the problem we're diving into today. Because if values are just abstract ideas, they are. Frankly, they're meaningless. So our mission, based on the material you shared, is to find a practical roadmap, a way to embed these values, to move them from, a bullet point list into the actual heartbeat of the culture.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What's the real cost of getting this wrong?
Oh, the cost is huge.
Sure.
It creates this massive trust deficit. I mean, core values should be guiding every single decision, every interaction, every policy. But the data just shows how widespread the failure is. The Gallup research we reviewed, it reveals that only 23% of employees strongly agree they can apply their organization's values to their daily work.
23%. That statistic it's staggering.
It is.
If only 1 in 4 people on your team can connect the company's stated values to what they're supposed to be doing at, say, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday,
Yeah.
then those values are just window dressing. They're decorative.
Exactly. Which means they can't guide behavior when it matters. So
Yeah.
the solution, according to the sources, is really about shifting those values from, abstraction to visibility. You have to turn them into visible, celebrated actions. And the way you do that is through consistent and really specific recognition.
I often think of core values as the organization's operating system. It's what determines how all the machinery runs. So before we get to the reinforcement part, let's just define their function clearly. They're the fundamental beliefs, the principles that guide behavior, especially, like you said, when nobody's watching.
And when they're authentic and they're actually reinforced, the sources are crystal clear that they serve 3 absolutely critical purposes. First, they guide decisions.
Okay.
They provide the compass in ambiguous situations. So let's say a team is facing a trade-off, maybe speed versus quality,
Right.
or customer convenience versus an employee's well-being. The values give you that consistent framework to make the right call.
So it reduces decision fatigue. It gives people a baseline to come back to.
Precisely. And second, they're a powerful tool to attract and retain talent.
Right. Yep.
When your values are clear, they act as a natural filter during hiring. The research confirms that employees who deeply resonate with the company's principles show, significantly higher engagement, and crucially, they stay substantially longer, which cuts down on that costly turnover.
So it's not just a culture thing, it's a strategic HR tool.
Absolutely. And third, and this is key, they set clear accountability standards. Values define what good looks like behaviorally. So when someone performs in line with a value or on the flip side violates it, everyone understands the implications right away. This shared standard makes expectations transparent and, just inherently fairer for everyone.
And we know people believe in this idea. The SHRM research confirms that 88% of employees think a strong culture drives business success. So the desire is there,
It is.
but the execution fails. So that brings us to the most critical step. How do you define values that actually feel authentic enough to be lived out?
That's where we get into the blueprint and the 4-step process for defining values that actually stick. It begins with a step that requires some real institutional vulnerability. Step 1 is to start with your current culture.
And I imagine most executives want to start with aspiration, right? What they wish their company was. But the source material is really insistent here. You have to start with ruthless honesty.
You have to. You have to look at what's actually rewarded, not what's on the poster. If you say collaboration is a value, but only the individual contributors who hoard all the knowledge get promoted.
Then your real value is individual heroism.
Exactly. You have to observe what behaviors get that public praise, and maybe even more revealing, what behaviors get someone fired. That boundary that
Right.
reveals your most intensely held actual values.
Which means the process of defining them is itself this high-stakes moment of truth.
It is. Then, moving to step 2. Gather input from every level. Values that are dreamed up in some exclusive executive retreat. They're just fundamentally disconnected from frontline reality. The sources really emphasize moving beyond just, generic surveys. You need real conversations. You have to intentionally include diverse perspectives, remote workers, people on the manufacturing floor, the C-suite, to make sure the values reflect the entire organization.
And you're looking for patterns and themes
Yeah.
in those conversations, right? Not necessarily 100% consensus.
Exactly. Patterns, not consensus.
So once you have those patterns, how do you get them into language that actually works?
That's step 3. Keep values short and specific. The advice here is pretty robust. Aim for, say, 4 to 7 values. That's enough to cover key principles without becoming overwhelming or forgettable. If a value takes 3 sentences to explain,
It's too abstract.
way too abstract. And the cardinal sin, corporate jargon. Avoid words like synergy or empowerment. They don't have any real behavioral content.
You need something specific enough to guide a decision. Own the outcome. Give someone a clear instruction. The word accountability on its own doesn't.
Precisely. The language has to be a decision-making tool. And finally, step 4. Align your values with business goals. Your values are the behavioral foundation for your strategy. If you compete on being the fastest to market, then values like, say, adaptability and risk tolerance, they become strategically vital. They're not just nice ideas.
That makes sense in theory, but here's the real friction point. What happens when your aspirational values, let's say people first, conflict directly with a short-term quarterly revenue goal? I mean, that conflict is inevitable. How does the source material suggest handling that?
That is the ultimate test of authenticity, isn't it? The sources imply that if leadership always prioritizes the revenue goal over the stated value, then the actual lived value is short-term profits. And the stated value just becomes meaningless. Alignment means you actively choose the value even when it costs you something. If the value is excellence, you sacrifice speed to maintain quality, even if it delays a quarterly number. The long-term consequences of that misalignment they're just far greater than the short-term cost of living the value.
That frames the definition process perfectly.
Yeah.
So once we know how to define them authentically, the next question is, what should we define? The sources gave us this fascinating list of 25 core value examples. Let's spend a little time synthesizing that.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that we can actually categorize all 25 of those examples into 5 clear thematic buckets. And it shows you the different sort of cultural flavors that companies choose to cultivate.
Okay, let's start with the bedrock, the integrity-based values.
So this covers the essentials, right? Integrity, honesty, transparency, accountability. But when you break them down, there's a lot of subtlety. Honesty is about telling the truth, sure. But transparency, that's about showing the whole process. For example, transparency means being open about why a decision was made, sharing the data behind it, even if that data is messy or controversial. It's about building trust by proactively sharing information.
That's a really important distinction. Transparency is proactive. It's not just reactive truth-telling.
Okay.
What about the second group? Innovation and growth.
This includes things like innovation, curiosity, adaptability, a growth mindset. And a lot of companies, they confuse innovation with a mandate to invent the next iPhone. But the source material emphasizes reinforcing this value by recognizing both successful outcomes and the valuable lessons you learn from intelligent attempts that failed.
Wow.
And curiosity is the engine here. It drives that continuous improvement by always asking why and what if, and then actually acting on the potential answers. So the system has to actively reward the risk-taking that's necessary for growth, not just the final win. I like that. The third category covers people-first values: respect, empathy, compassion, trust, and kindness.
These are really the values that create psychological safety. And the insight around compassion is particularly powerful. It's not just feeling bad for someone. It's transforming empathy into practical help.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, it might mean actively mentoring a colleague who's struggling with a new skill, or covering for a team member who's dealing with a personal emergency, or even using your position to advocate for someone who maybe can't speak up for themselves.
Compassion defined as action. That's very specific and very memorable.
Exactly. And kindness. Kindness builds that cultural glue through small, consistent acts, like a genuine, specific thank you that acknowledges someone's effort, not just the result.
Moving on to the fourth category, the results drivers. Performance and accountability. That's excellence, commitment, dependability, passion, and ownership. Here, ownership is the real standout. It's the difference between just doing what you're told and treating the company's success as your personal responsibility. Employees who show true ownership, they don't wait for direction. They might identify a problem in another department, propose a solution, and then actually follow through on it, even if it's not technically in their job description.
That's what turns a compliance culture into a proactive one, where
Yes.
everyone is focused on the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And then finally, the fifth group focuses on connection, collaboration, and community.
Teamwork, collaboration, diversity, openness, communication, and recognition.
And collaboration here is defined by working across organizational boundaries, across departments, levels, geographies, specifically to break down those internal silos that can choke big organizations. But the most insightful piece in this entire group is recognition itself. The sources actually cite recognition as a meta value. It doesn't describe what you do, but how you accelerate all the other values. It's the main tool for reinforcement.
That's a perfect hinge point. We've defined the values, but now we have to talk about making them stick. And here's where it gets really interesting. The active role of recognition.
Behaviors that get recognized get repeated. I mean, it's a simple feedback loop, but most organizations completely fail to systematize it. Recognition is what moves a value from a concept to a tangible behavior.
And when an action that's tied to a value is acknowledged publicly, the impact is just. It's immense. Not only does the individual feel valued, but every single person watching understands exactly what that value looks like in practice. It clarifies priorities. It shifts cultural norms.
And this mechanism has to be deliberate. It needs to be frequent and visible across the entire organization. The source material highlights platform features like the workmate system that provide that kind of systematic structure. We're talking about things like a values-based badge system where an abstract value becomes this concrete, trackable thing, a specific excellence badge, for instance.
Which gives peers and managers a shared language to celebrate that action. And I really appreciate the emphasis on peer-to-peer recognition. Values just feel more real when appreciation flows in all directions, not just top-down from management. It sort of democratizes the culture.
And critically, in our distributed modern workforce, mobile accessibility is non-negotiable. If your recognition system is stuck on a desktop, you're excluding frontline workers, retail staff, remote employees.
Right. It can't be an office worker privilege.
It can't. It has to be inclusive.
Okay, let's zero in on one of the case studies the sources provided, just to see this mechanism in action. Tell us about Marcus and the integrity scenario.
Sure. So the scenario centers on the value of integrity, which they define as doing what's right even when it's inconvenient. Marcus is working under intense pressure to meet a project deadline, and he discovers a pretty significant data error in his own work. Now, fixing it correctly will cause a 2-day delay to the launch, and that jeopardizes the whole deadline.
So this is that classic conflict. The stated value, integrity, versus the operational pressure of the deadline. And it takes real courage to choose the value.
It really does. So instead of hiding the mistake and just hoping no one notices, Marcus immediately flags the issue to his manager. And his manager, he publicly recognizes Marcus with an integrity badge on the company platform. And he explains the context. Marcus chose accuracy over convenience, even when the pressure was at its absolute highest.
So in that moment, what did the rest of the team learn about the company's priorities? About deadlines versus integrity?
They learned that integrity is a non-negotiable. It completely shifts the cultural norm from hide problems to hit the deadline to surfacing problems as expected, rewarded behavior. When the whole organization sees Marcus get recognized for slowing the project down, they learn that integrity literally outweighs hitting that original timeline. That's the power of specific values-based recognition.
And the impact is more than just anecdotal. The source material confirms it. Companies that explicitly tie recognition to their core values see substantially higher engagement scores and dramatically lower turnover.
Much lower.
And it's all compared to companies with just generic, good job programs. That specificity is the difference maker.
To just reiterate that central theme, values are the compass, right? They define the direction you need to go. But recognition is the daily wind that moves the ship forward. And when recognition aligns perfectly with those values, people trust that the values are real. They trust that they're worth adopting.
And that trust is essential for sustainability. And we briefly noted that values can evolve, but should they be constantly changing?
No, not at all. They should be relatively enduring. But they aren't carved in granite forever. The source material notes that values can evolve as an organization grows or if market conditions fundamentally shift your business model. The key, though, is that any changes have to be deliberate. They have to be well communicated. And, crucially, they have to include input from all levels of the company to stop them from just being another mandate from the top.
So what does this all mean?
It means the ultimate goal, building on everything we've talked about, is consistency, especially at the leadership level. If leaders talk about ownership but refuse to delegate any real responsibility, or they profess people first but consistently sacrifice employee well-being for short-term results, the values are immediately exposed as decorative, as a fiction. Leadership behavior is the ultimate determinant.
And here's the final provocative thought for you to mull over as you get back to your work. The source notes that your actual lived values are revealed not by what you post on the wall, but by what behaviors you would fire someone for, and what behaviors you consistently reward. So considering the 25 examples we talked about today, from transparency to ownership to compassion, which of those principles are truly non-negotiable in your organization, even when they conflict directly with short-term results? Answering that reveals the real culture you are building today.